The engine of my old Ford pickup rumbled under me, a familiar, comforting sound. I was parked across the street just watching the dorm where my Molly lived. A father's habit, I guess. You spend 18 years keeping watch over someone. You don't just turn it off. That's when I saw it. A dark sedan, windows tinted so black they swallowed the afternoon light. It was idling at the curb, too far down from the main entrance. Nobody waits there. Not for a pickup, not for a friend. My hands, rough and scarred from a lifetime of hauling traps, tightened on the steering wheel. It was a calm day, but every old instinct in me, the ones that used to read the weather in a shift of the wind or sense a snarled line before it happened, started screaming. Something was wrong. This was a predator, lying in wait. I slouched down a little, making myself smaller behind the wheel. 40 years on the water teaches you how to observe without being seen. I watched, my breath still in my chest. The driver's window slid down, just a crack. And then I saw it. The glint of a long lens poking out like the barrel of a rifle. It wasn't pointed at the building. It was tracking something. My eyes followed its aim, and my blood went cold. There she was, my Molly. A splash of color in a bright yellow sweater, laughing with a friend on the steps, her books hugged to her chest. Oblivious, happy. And that lens was drinking her in. Click, click. I could almost hear the shutter from here. Someone was taking pictures of my daughter. Not candids of a group, targeted, precise. A fury, old and deep, hotter than any galley stove, burned through my veins. This wasn't curiosity. This was a study. This was a hunt. Every scar on my knuckles ached with the memory of fights I'd left behind decades ago. The man in that car wasn't just a stranger. In that moment, he became the storm I hadn't seen coming, the hidden rock meant to rip my hull apart. I didn't move. I just watched, my jaw set like granite. The car sat there, a black hole of bad intentions, as my little girl smiled in the sun, completely unaware of the shadow I'd just spotted clinging to her light. The open water never lied, and right now, it was telling me a gale was coming. The quiet is the hardest part. After 20 years of engine noise, shouted orders, and the constant hum of a ship at sea, the silence in this old house feels heavy. It's the silence she left behind. My wife, Anna. Some days I swear I can still hear her laughing from the kitchen, but it's just the old pipes groaning. I live in that silence, anchored by one thing, my daughter, Molly. She's 17, all bright eyes and a stubbornness she definitely got from her mother. She's my compass, my reason to keep the deck clean, so to speak. Tonight the silence was broken by the sound of her key in the door. I was in my chair, the one by the window, pretending to read a fishing catalog. "Hey, Dad," she said, dropping her backpack with a thud. "Hey, kiddo, how was the library?" She flopped onto the couch, scrolling through her phone. "Fine. Got my history paper done. Oh, weird thing, though." I looked up from a picture of a frankly unrealistic trout. "Weird how?" "There was this guy," she said, her voice casual, but I saw the way her thumb stopped scrolling. Creepy vibe, you know. He was just hanging around the nonfiction section. Then he comes up to me while I'm at the desk and asks what my usual shift schedule is, like if I work every Tuesday. Every muscle in my back tightened. The fishing catalog slowly closed in my lap. What did you tell him? I said I just volunteer. It's not a set schedule. He just nodded and walked off. Didn't even look at a book. She finally looked at me, and I saw a flicker of unease in her eyes that she'd been trying to hide. It was probably nothing, right? Just some weirdo. But it wasn't nothing. I've seen weirdos. I've stood watching ports where the air itself felt dangerous. This was different. A cold, familiar fire I hadn't felt in years ignited low in my gut. It wasn't the hot rage of a bar fight. It was the cold, calculating burn of a threat assessment. Someone was scouting. Someone was gathering intel on my daughter. The quiet of the house wasn't just empty now. It felt watchful, threatening. Probably, I said, my voice surprisingly calm even to my own ears. I stood up, walked to the window, and checked the lock. It was already secured. But from now on, text me when you get there and when you leave. No walking to your car alone. Understood? Dad, come on. Molly. Understood? I turned from the window, and she must have seen something in my face, the ghost of the man who used to watch horizons for threats, because she just nodded. Okay, understood. I looked back out into the darkening street, the peaceful life, the quiet retirement. It felt like a thin layer of ice over deep, black water, and someone had just taken a step onto it. My daughter was the only light I had left in this world, and I'd burn everything down before I let anything snuff it out. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the steering wheel just to keep them still. The tail lights of that gray sedan were like two red eyes in the dusk, leading me further from the familiar streets of our town and into the thickening woods. Every instinct screamed to call the police, but the memory of that empty parking lot, of Molly's missing smile, froze the thought. This was on me. I hung back, letting trees and bends in the gravel road hide my truck. The sedan finally turned onto a narrow, overgrown driveway, disappearing into a stand of pines. I killed my headlights and rolled to a stop 100 yards back, my heart hammering against my ribs. Quiet as a shadow, I moved on foot. The cabin was a squat, dark thing, wood-stained nearly black by moisture and neglect. A single window glowed yellow. Creeping closer, every crunch of pine needles under my boots sounded like a gunshot. I ducked beneath the windowsill, my back pressed to the cold, rough logs. Gathering every ounce of courage, I risked a glance over the sill, and the world dropped out from under me. It was him. Preston. I'd only seen him in grainy security footage before, but I knew the set of his shoulders, the cold efficiency of his movements. He wasn't pacing or raging. He was methodically taping photographs to the bare cabin wall. Photographs of Molly, her laughing outside the school gym, walking home with her friends, backpack slung over one shoulder. One even showed her through our kitchen window, unaware, bathed in the warm light of home. He had been watching. For days, maybe weeks. This wasn't some crime of opportunity, a snatched purse gone wrong. The chilling precision of it, the timeline in the logbook, now this shrine of surveillance, painted a picture so much worse than I'd imagined. This was organized, planned. He had a purpose for her, and that purpose was written in the cold focus on his face as he stepped back to admire his horrible collection. My blood didn't just run cold, it turned to ice water in my veins. A raw, primal fear, colder than the mountain air, locked my joints. This was the monster from the logbook made flesh. and he had my daughter in his sights. The dead rose was a single blackened thing, laid with terrible care on the driver's side windshield of Molly's Honda. It wasn't a bouquet, it wasn't an apology. It was a period at the end of a sentence we hadn't finished reading. I watched Molly's face go pale, then hard, as she plucked it off the glass with 2 fingers like it was a poisonous insect. "He was here," she said, her voice flat. "He touched my car."
We called the police, of course. Officer Grady came out, a decent man with kind eyes and hands tied by procedure. He took notes, bagged the rose, and nodded along as I explained about Preston, about the calls, the feeling of being watched. But I saw it in the set of his shoulders. "No direct threat," he said. "Vandalism, maybe." Without an explicit message, without a witness, their hands were tied. He promised extra patrols, but his words felt thin, like tissue paper against a coming storm. "They can't help us," Molly whispered after his cruiser pulled away. She wasn't crying, she was furious, and that was worse. "He's just going to keep getting closer." That was the moment I knew. The time for waiting, for hoping the system would catch up, was over. Preston was operating in the shadows, and to fight him, I had to step back into mine. I went to the attic, the air thick with memory and dust. In a battered olive-drab footlocker, beneath old blankets, was my past life, my surveillance kit. I lifted the lid. The smell of stale electronics and leather case oil hit me. There were 4 small, boxy CCTV cameras with tangled cords, their lenses dusty but intact. A stack of black-and-white composition notebooks, their pages filled with my own tight, faded script from cases long closed, and resting on top, like an old friend, a portable police scanner, its antenna folded down. My hands, which had felt useless all week, remembered their purpose. They tested the scanner first. A crackle of static, then the calm, coded chatter of dispatch filled the quiet attic. It was the sound of the town's pulse. I was back on the grid. Downstairs, I spread it all on the kitchen table. Molly watched, her earlier fear now tempered by a spark of grim resolve. "What's the plan, Dad?" "The plan," I said, powering up a camera, its red LED winking to life, "is to turn the lights on. He likes the dark? We'll give him a spotlight." The hunt wasn't his anymore. It had begun, and this time I was the one laying the traps. Every notebook entry, every camera angle, every whisper on that scanner would be a thread, and I would weave them together until I had a net with only one name: Preston. The leather cover of the logbook felt cool under my palms. This was my map now, my only weapon. Preston had invaded our peace, and I was done just feeling watched. I had to understand the hunter to protect my cub. My old skills, rusty from years of a quiet life, came back with a cold, familiar clarity. I became a ghost in my own town. I'd park my truck blocks away, use reflections in store windows, and keep the sun at my back. I started to see the pattern, the careful, sickening rhythm of his days. Every Tuesday and Thursday, like clockwork, he'd be at the public library, not in the stacks, but in the periodical section by the western window, a perfect elevated vantage point to watch the park across the street, the park where Molly sometimes studied on sunny afternoons. I'd be in the fiction aisle, my phone's camera discreetly capturing him through the shelves, his gaunt profile intent on the window. Then, the daily grind coffee shop. He'd take the corner table, back to the wall, facing the door. He'd nurse a single black coffee for 2 hours, his eyes constantly scanning the comings and goings. I sat in my car down the block, a long lens documenting his vigilant, joyless routine. I noted the times: 10 a.m., 2 p.m., always when Molly's class schedule meant she might pass by. The worst was discovering the jogging route. Molly runs every evening along the river path. One dusk, from a ridge overlooking the trail, I saw him, a distant, still figure under a sycamore tree, just watching. My blood went cold. I zoomed in with my camera, the click of the shutter a tiny act of defiance. 7:15 p.m., gray sedan, license plate Echo Charlie 742. I scribbled it all in the logbook, my handwriting tight with anger. But surveillance alone wasn't enough. I needed to know who he was. Using his plate and a few old contacts, I dug deeper. The picture that emerged was telling. Preston wasn't just a random creep. He was Dr. Alden Preston, former professor of ethics at the State College. Fired 2 years ago. The official reason was vague. Violation of professional conduct policies. But the whispers, the fragments from old news forum posts, hinted at something darker. Inappropriate obsession with a student, boundary violations, a hearing held behind closed doors, a fired professor, a man stripped of his position, his authority, his identity. Now he was building a new, twisted routine around my daughter, substituting one obsession for another. I closed the logbook, the entries now painting a terrifyingly clear portrait. This wasn't random. It was calculated. And knowing that, ironically, gave me my first real sense of control. I knew his patterns. I knew his history. The shadow had a name, and I had it written down in black and white. I was grabbing the mail, just like any other Tuesday afternoon, when I saw it. A plain white envelope, no stamp. Just Molly's name scrawled in a handwriting that made my blood run cold. It was in her personal mailbox, the little decorative one by her apartment door that she'd painted sunflower yellow. My hands didn't even shake. They went still, like stone. This wasn't a public space anymore. This was her doorstep. Preston had crossed a line from being a lurking problem to something far more intimate, far more dangerous. I see you always. 4 words on a slip of paper. Nothing else. The violation of it stole the air from my lungs. He wasn't just watching from a distance now. He was here, touching her things, invading the small space that was supposed to be her sanctuary. I didn't open her door. I didn't call her out. I just stood there, the note pinched between my fingers, staring at that cheerful yellow paint. All the frustration, the weeks of looking over our shoulders, the careful entries in the logbook documenting his car, his patterns, his presence. It crystallized into one cold, hard certainty. This was the crisis. He was escalating. Waiting for the police, waiting for another piece of evidence, wasn't a plan anymore. It was an invitation for him to make the next move. And the next move, after a note like this, wouldn't be another note. I thought of Molly inside, probably studying, completely unaware that the threshold of her home had been breached. That was the whole point, wasn't it? To make her feel seen, even in her safest place, to paralyze her with fear. Well, it had the opposite effect on me. It ignited me. Folding the note carefully, I slipped it into my pocket. It was evidence, yes, but more than that, it was my trigger.
The logbook was full of his movements, his habits. It was a record of his obsession. But I realized I'd been reading it wrong. I'd been using it as a shield, a document to hand to someone else. Now, I saw it for what it could be, a blueprint. He wanted to watch us, to stalk us, to control the game from the shadows? No, not anymore. The rules had changed the moment he touched that mailbox. I was done being the watched. It was time to turn the tables completely. I didn't know exactly how yet, but the what was suddenly clear. I would use his own pattern, his own arrogance, against him. He thought he was the hunter. It was time for Preston to learn what it felt like to be the prey. The air at the waterfront park was cold and damp, smelling of wet earth and distant salt. I'd been here for 2 hours, tucked into a blind of my own making between a dense thicket of rhododendrons and the park's maintenance shed. My knees ached against the hard ground, but I didn't dare move. In my hands was a small monitor split into 4 grainy, green-hued squares from the wireless cameras I'd hidden last night. This was the trap. The bait was Molly's schedule. She had a study group at the library downtown, a fact I'd accidentally mentioned within earshot of a mutual acquaintance I knew reported back to Preston. It was a sick game, using my own daughter's routine as a lure, but the law needed proof. I needed the logbook to have its final, irrefutable entry. My breath fogged in the dim morning light. The park was mostly empty. Just an old man walking a dog far down the path, and the occasional jogger. Then, at exactly 7:15 a.m., the time Molly usually cut through this park on her way to the bus, a figure appeared on the center-left screen. Preston. He moved with a purpose that was too deliberate for a casual walk. He stopped at the bench by the old oak, Molly's bench where she'd sit to tie her shoe. He didn't sit. He just stood there, his head slowly panning, scanning the perimeter. My thumb hovered over the record button on the main camera's remote. Not yet. I needed the act. He pulled something from his pocket. Binoculars. He raised them, training them down the path that led from the library's direction. He was waiting for her. He was staking out her route. A cold fury, clean and sharp, cut through my anxiety. This was it. The undeniable proof. I pressed the button. On my monitor, a tiny red light glowed on the feed from the camera nestled in the birdhouse facing the bench. I zoomed in. The image was crystal clear. Preston's profile, the binoculars pressed to his face, his body tense with expectation. I didn't just have a man in a park. I had a stalker, documented in the act of surveilling his victim's location. I slowly panned my own handheld camera, secured to a tripod in the blind, capturing the wider context. His solitary, predatory wait in a place meant for peace. He stood there for 12 minutes. 12 long minutes, where my entire world narrowed to the screen and the steady, silent recording. Finally, as if sensing the trap, he lowered the binoculars, shoved them back into his coat, and with one last look around, walked briskly away, disappearing from my screens. I didn't move until my shaking hands forced me to. I stopped the recordings, both the hidden ones and mine. The evidence was captured. The digital files, time-stamped and clear, were the final, damning pages for the logbook. Preston had taken the bait, and I had him. Not with my fists, but with the truth, framed in pixels and cold morning light. It was the first real victory I'd felt in months. The sun was too bright for what I was about to do. I sat on a park bench, the old leather logbook heavy on my lap, my camera around my neck. My heart wasn't pounding with fear anymore. It was a slow, cold, steady drumbeat of certainty. Across the playground, Molly was on the swings, and right on time, like the pathetic creature of habit he was, Preston's car pulled up. I watched him get out, that friendly dad smile already plastered on his face. He started walking toward her, calling her name. "Molly! Hey, thought I might find you here." That was my cue. I didn't run, I didn't yell. I just stood up and started walking, my boots quiet on the grass. "Preston," I said, my voice clear and carrying. He froze, the smile flickering. "Silas." "Hey, man, I know exactly what you were just doing," I said, lifting my camera. I didn't point it at him like a weapon. I turned it around, showing him the LCD screen. It was the photo from 3 days ago. Him, by his car, watching our house from down the block. "You were here Tuesday at 4:15 p.m., outside the library on Elm, Wednesday, 3:50 p.m. I clicked to the next photo. The digital proof was right there in my hands. A woman pushing a stroller slowed down. A man walking his dog paused. Preston's face drained of color. "What is this?" "Those are public places, Silas. You're being paranoid." "Am I?" I opened the logbook. My handwriting filled the pages. Dates, times, locations, license plate numbers. "This is a record of every time you've placed yourself in my daughter's path for the last 11 weeks. 37 separate instances. You don't go to the grocery store that often, Preston? You don't have a kid on this soccer team." My voice grew louder, not with anger, but with the sheer, undeniable weight of the evidence. "You've been tracking the schedule of a 14-year-old girl." The word tracking hung in the air. More people stopped. The playground chatter died down. Molly had gotten off the swing and was standing perfectly still, watching me, her ally, from a safe distance. Preston took a step back, his eyes darting around at the gathering circle of normal, everyday people, mothers, fathers, retirees. Their faces were no longer neutral. They were hardening into masks of disgust and recognition. He was being seen, truly seen, for the first time. "This is insane," he sputtered. But the bluster was gone. It was the whine of a cornered animal. "You can't just follow people." "I didn't follow you," I said, finally closing the book with a soft, definitive thump. "I documented you. There's a difference. One is stalking, the other is proof." I didn't need to say another word. The crowd's murmurs did it for me. A mother put a protective arm around her own child. The man with the dog stepped a little closer to me. Preston looked from face to face, and in every one he saw a judge. He saw his own reflection, and it was a predator. Without another sound, he turned and almost ran back to his car, fumbling with the keys. He didn't look back. I stood there, the logbook in my hand, and watched him flee from the light of simple, exposed truth. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt quiet and clean. It was over. The sound of sirens wasn't a relief at first. It was just a new kind of tension, a high-pitched wail cutting through the cold mountain air. I stood on the porch, Molly tucked safely behind me, the weight of the logbook in my hand finally feeling like what it was, evidence, not just a burden. I watched as 2 county cruisers slid to a halt in the gravel, lights painting the trees in frantic red and blue. The officers moved with a professional calm that was the complete opposite of the storm inside my chest. I didn't say a word as I handed over the logbook. I just pointed to the page, my finger resting on the timeline I'd compiled, dates, times, the patterns of a predator's obsession. That's when everything shifted. It was no longer my word against his. The logbook gave them a map. One officer stayed with us, his voice low and reassuring, while the others followed the trail my notes laid out. They went to Preston's car, parked haphazardly further down the road. From it, they pulled a box. Even from this distance, I could see what it contained. More photographs, printed maps with our routes highlighted, and a stack of letters addressed to Molly that were never sent. My stomach turned. The logbook had told them where to look, and they found the story it hinted at, written in Preston's own hand. Then they went to the small, unassuming cabin he'd rented. I couldn't see inside, but I saw them carrying out a laptop and a filing box. The lead detective came back over, his face grim. "You were right to document everything, Mr. Silas," he said. "The digital trail matches your paper one. Emails, search histories, location pings. It's all there." The final moment was almost quiet. They brought Preston out. He wasn't fighting. He looked deflated, empty, his eyes fixed on the ground as they guided him into the back of a cruiser. He didn't look at me, or at the cabin, or at the woods he'd used as his hiding place. He just stared at his own hands, cuffed in his lap. The obsession he thought made him powerful, the surveillance he believed made him a ghost, was the very thing that etched his guilt in undeniable detail. I had chronicled his every move, and in doing so I'd built the cage that finally caught him. As the car carrying him pulled away, the sirens off, the sudden silence was profound. The threat was neutralized, not by a fight, but by the truth, meticulously recorded. Molly stepped forward and slipped her hand into mine. We didn't speak. We just watched the taillights disappear into the pines, the weight of his watching presence lifting, leaving behind only the quiet, the cold, and a deep, trembling peace. The evening air on the porch is cool and smells of salt and pine. I let out a breath I feel like I've been holding for years. Next to me in the old rocking chair, Molly is quiet, her gaze fixed on the harbor lights starting to shimmer on the darkening water. Between us, on the small table, is the logbook. It's closed. For weeks it sat on my desk like a live wire. I'd transcribed every relevant page, every damning entry in Preston's own arrogant hand, and handed it all over. The police work was swift, clinical. They credited the evidence, my evidence, for the conviction. No lengthy trial, no dramatic courtroom showdown, just the cold, hard truth of numbers, times, and names, locking the door behind a monster. Preston is gone. Not just from this town, but from our lives. For good. I look at Molly. The tightness around her eyes that had been a constant presence since she was a teenager is finally gone. She looks young again. Or maybe she just looks like herself for the first time in a long time. She's safe. That's the only word that matters. It's the only currency that ever held any value. "It's over, Dad," she says softly, not looking at me, but at the peaceful, endless stretch of the sea. "It is," I say, and my voice is steadier than I expected. I reach over and rest my hand on the worn leather cover of the logbook. It's just an object now. A ledger of sins, yes, but its power to harm is spent. It's a closed case, a finished chapter. I used to think my skills, the patience, the observation, the quiet, tactical mind honed over a lifetime, were relics, things I used for hobbies, for fixing boats, for navigating tricky currents. I was wrong. They were tools, waiting for the right purpose. And there is no purpose more right than this, than protecting her. A comfortable silence settles between us, filled only by the creak of the rocking chairs and the distant cry of a gull. The last of the sunset is a faint orange smudge behind the hills, giving way to a deep, calm blue. The lights from the boats in the harbor are like fallen stars, steady and sure. I am at peace. It's not a loud feeling. It's a deep, solid quiet in my bones. The fight is done, and we won, not with fists or fury, but with truth and patience. My daughter is safe beside me, the villain is gone, and the water before us holds no shadows any more. Just the promise of tomorrow, calm and open.